Prezados senhores e senhoras, boa tarde. A Faculdade de Direito de Ribeirão Preto, da Universidade de São Paulo, tem a honra de recebê-los para o Seminário Internacional de Bibliotecas. Inovação, Informação e Documentação. Agradecemos a participação da nossa convidada e dou boas-vindas às colegas Tami Lança e Edneia Silva Santos Rocha, que nos acompanham e nos dão suporte no dia de hoje. Agradecemos a participação de todos que nos acompanham pelo YouTube. Informamos que o evento será realizado 100% online e a palestra será proferida em inglês. Seja muito bem-vinda, nossa palestrante. Ela é consultora em Alberta, Canadá. Atualmente é presidente da Alberta Library, um consórcio de bibliotecas da província de Alberta. Depois de uma carreira como gestora de bibliotecas públicas e acadêmicas, tornou-se professora da Faculdade de Administração da Universidade de McEwan, assim como foi consultora em todos os tipos de biblioteca. Além da pós-graduação em biblioteconomia, também possui doutorado em comportamento organizacional. Ela é bibliotecária emérita da Universidade de Alberta e uma das idealizadoras e signatária do acordo que implementou o consórcio Alberta Library. E desde então desempenhou diferentes funções e ocupou diferentes cargos. Sua palestra contará a experiência do consórcio da Alberta Library, da sua criação aos dias de hoje. Welcome, Dr. Margaret Law. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. I already had the opportunity to introduce you in Portuguese, and the attendees will have the opportunity to raise questions, doubts, and concerns through the YouTube chat. Please feel free to start your conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Milena. Just before I start my slides and my presentation, thank you so much for inviting me. Here in Alberta today at 16 degrees, it's springtime, and we're hoping it's going to get warm soon. We've had a really cold spring and our gardens are suffering a bit. So I have slides. The slides will be available to everybody. And I'm happy to be here talking about the Alberta Library. So what we are, the Alberta Library is a multi-type library consortium. We have more than 50 member libraries in over 300 locations, all in one province in Alberta. What makes us unique is that most consortia have only one type of library. We are a bit different. We have public libraries. We have regional library systems, which are in rural areas, provide library service in small communities. We have university libraries, we have college and technical institute libraries, and we have special and government libraries. So we pretty much have all different types of libraries that exist in this province. So when you get the slides, if you click on this link, you'll actually see a map of where Alberta sits in Canada. But I wanted to give you some numbers that will help you think about our situation. The entire country of Canada has only 38 million people. Alberta, as one of the 10 provinces, has 4.5 million. Compare that with the state of California in the United States, which has 39.5 million people, more than our whole country. Or in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, which is somewhere around 13.5 million. These numbers are important because it leads a little bit into what happened with us in our development. So why do we even exist at all? There are, across Alberta, more than 200 public libraries. There are then public universities, public colleges, public institutions. There are also private institutions and a number of religious-based colleges. So we have a lot of different kinds of libraries spread very widely. Our population density is very low in Canada, so it's not unusual for us to travel far to attend something. So for example, tomorrow I'm going to a meeting that's 300 kilometers away. So I'll drive there in the morning, spend the day there, and drive back in the evening. So part of our culture is a lot of local autonomy. And so we don't have a lot of direction from the government in terms of how we should work together. That's up to people locally negotiating. We also have very uneven access to technology even now, which is a function of distance and cost. Canada has perhaps the second or third most expensive internet access in the world. And because of our small population, because of our distribution, we actually would have no negotiating power with vendors because we're smaller than the state of California. And so that led us to form a consortium. So 1995 was a very difficult year here. There was a lot of economic stress. Libraries were suddenly being hit with the expectation of using technology without money and without expertise. So a group of libraries got together and negotiated an agreement that led to the formation of the consortium. What was interesting about it was that the early participants included some of our most senior and experienced colleagues, as well as some of our newest colleagues. So it really was across the board. There were many political challenges. Oh my goodness, you can hear that I have a dog in the background. This is working from home. Many political challenges, a lot having to do with autonomy and people not wanting to share their resources, particularly when they were feeling short of money. So one of our first big projects was called the Alberta Public Library Electronic Network. It took 5 years to electronically connect all of the public libraries in Alberta. This was funded with grants from local government, from the national government, and from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Excuse me just a minute. My apologies, I have a puppy. So this led us to the development of other shared projects. So we had a project called TAL Online, which was a province-wide union catalog. Every library in the province added all of their catalog records, and consequently, for the first time ever, anybody could see what was being held in other libraries. And that provided an opportunity for some collection development to save some money by seeing what other people had, but also for buying together to start negotiating discounts. It also meant that we had interlibrary loan among all our members. And because you could look and see what other people had, it was very, very easy to then borrow from them. One of our next projects was called Lois Hole Campus Alberta Digital Library. And this has been going now, this project continues. It's about 20 years old. We convinced the government department that's responsible for higher education to give us money to purchase full text material for every post-secondary student in the province. And they continue to give us about $1.5 million a year. And with that, we're able to negotiate savings of more than 58%. So the government still thinks they're getting a good deal. We do the work, and we can say that every student in Alberta has, at the very least, access to this particular set of databases. I've actually provided the link for those of you who'd like to go into that and see the specifics of what's included. By 2001, the government approached us actually to see if we would take on a project to buy online resources for school children. So K-12 is what we call it. It's kindergarten until you finish secondary school. Again, they gave us some money and we were able to buy licensed resources for every student, parent, and school staff in the province. The government just recently decided, like last year, that this wasn't needed anymore. And so we don't get funded for that anymore. The reason I'm mentioning that is because that part has been part of our history, is that funding comes and goes. One of our biggest accomplishments, the thing that took us the longest to negotiate and still exists, is we have a universal library card. So in addition to the card you have at your own institution, you can have a library card that is good at any other member library of the Alberta Library. So 300 libraries in the province, you can use your library card. Obviously, that's what you see on the surface. Behind it, there was a lot of negotiation around what happens about missing material, what happens when material's returned late, and things like that. So it looks fairly simple, but there's a lot of negotiation behind it. So how do we actually operate? We are what's called in Canada a not-for-profit corporation. So we're like a business, we're similar to a business, except we don't make a profit. And so that makes us an autonomous body. And that has legal obligations, but it also provides us with certain freedoms. Originally, when we set it up, every member had one representative on the board. That worked well in the beginning. It gave people a chance to work together and start to trust each other. But once we were up to 50 members, the board got so big that it didn't function well. It was far too slow, and it was far too expensive to get people together because everybody had to travel. So we had a restructuring, and what we have now is a 9-member board that's elected by our members. And there's built into our agreement a guarantee that there will be at least one person on the board at all times representing universities. There will always be a person representing colleges and technical institutes. There will always be a person representing public libraries. And there will always be a person representing the regional libraries that serve in rural areas. And that has actually worked much better. It's much more efficient. It's much cheaper. We have a big annual general meeting once a year where we all come together and generally have some training and some other activities, as well as a business meeting. But the actual day-to-day business of the organization is carried out by this board and by the staff. So what exactly did people agree to when they joined? We wanted to make it simple. So there's really only 2 things people agree to. One is to work together to benefit library services to everybody in Alberta, in our province, by sharing what we have to share. So not just resources, but expertise and opportunities. The other one is to share resources with each other without cost. And I'm kind of smiling saying that because, of course, when we set this up, people were very fearful. The big libraries were concerned that the small libraries would borrow all of their material and then they wouldn't have enough for their own users. The small libraries were concerned that the big libraries, because they had so many more users, would borrow all their things and not return them. And so that's why it took us 2 years of negotiating to even get started, because we had to work through all of those concerns. And what's been interesting is that over the years, we have quite a lot of statistics that show that, surprisingly, big libraries borrow as much as they lend, and small libraries lend as much as they borrow. So it really is everybody puts in what they have to the benefit of everybody. So how are we funded? Of course, like everything else that we do in libraries, this is a headache. We have funding from our members. Everybody pays a membership fee. Our public libraries pay by population. It's calculated on their population. Academic and special libraries, it's actually calculated on their budget. We're revisiting that this year because budgets change radically, and that's not very stable funding for the consortium. We also charge a small fee on licensing, and our members find that even having to pay us the licensing fee, they're still financially in a better position than if they tried to negotiate on their own. And we are always applying for grants. So we're always looking at foundations, we're always looking at governments, we're always looking at anybody who has money that we can apply for. So what is it we do now? So I've talked a little bit about how we got here the last 25 years, but our biggest service right now is licensing. And we license to our members for a very small licensing fee. We also license to non-members, but they pay a lot more. They pay a much larger licensing fee. That's a fairly recent addition to our services, based on the fact that not everybody can join. So school libraries, because of the way schools are set up in Alberta, school libraries are not easily able to join a consortium, but they can buy service from us. So we have a whole licensing program for elementary and secondary schools that they can just buy. We do training. We focus on management, and I'll come back to that. We do a lot of advocacy on province-wide issues that affect everybody. We just recently started coordinating the summer reading program for all the public libraries in Alberta. And we've also started a project called curriculum mapping, where we take information resources, in this case, the databases that we provide, and we go through the current school curriculum and we pull out resources that match the curriculum and provide teachers and professors with links to relevant materials so they don't have to look. That's an ongoing project. It will never be finished, but it gets used a lot, and so we're constantly developing it. So let's talk a little bit more about licensing. We don't do licensing on our own because Canada is such a small market. The Alberta Library belongs to a much bigger consortium that crosses the country. And so other library consortia all belong to this big buying group, this other consortium. And so that has helped us because that guarantees that the best price we can accomplish is the same across the country. Totally, right now, we spend about $7.5 million a year buying resources for our members. Our average discount is 29.8%. But there, of course, the discounts range. So we get 5% on some things. We get 75% on some things. Right now, we're negotiating with 54 vendors, and we provide 245 products. There are some challenges, of course. The two biggest ones are, one is that dealing with vendors who don't understand consortium buying and selling. And so we seem to spend a lot of time educating them, and providing technical support is always an ongoing challenge, just because of our geography, because of the distribution of our population. So we have two new strategies to improve our licensing. We've just started licensing tools as well as information resources. So any tools that people would buy to use in the library, like computer-assisted drawing software or plagiarism spotting software. We're now negotiating to buy those for our members as well. Whereas traditionally we just bought information databases. This is a new strategy for us. And the second one is licensing to non-members. And so, as well as the schools I talked about, we have been approached by some municipal governments who want to license material for their offices. And so they, of course, pay a completely different fee because they're not members. So we provide training across the province, but we negotiated with the library associations here to avoid duplication. And so we only provide training that benefits the whole province and that focuses on management, because the other kinds of professional development are covered quite well by the associations. Currently, we're running a series of future symposiums to help people start thinking about, how do you do planning after a pandemic? How do you prepare for the future? And it's also to celebrate our 25th anniversary. That is paid for actually by 50% a grant from a foundation and 50% sponsorship from a vendor. So that's how we can pay for things like that. We do a lot of advocacy, but our position is that we prepare the tools for the province, for people to use and to adapt. We don't actually do advocacy for them. So for us to enter into developing tools, obviously, we want it to affect a significant portion of our membership. And we're looking at creating the work that, so that to stop the duplication of effort. If everybody in the province is going to be doing advocacy, for example, because of an election, then we do the work, everybody benefits. Our last big project was we had a municipal election here in the fall. And so we had an election kit, and I've provided the link if you want to see what it looks like. And right now we're under construction for a provincial election advocacy toolkit. And so what the toolkit is something that any one of our members can use. They can adapt to their own community. They can adapt to their own library needs. But we've done the significant amount of the preparation for them. So would be nice if everything was perfect, but we do have some significant challenges. The first is that our members now take us for granted. We've been here so long, 25 years, that most of the people working in our member libraries don't recall a time when we didn't exist, when we didn't do their purchasing for them. And so they sometimes forget the value that we bring. And so that's something that we're working on right now, in reminding our members about the value, but also doing orientation for new library managers and things like that. Changing technology is always a significant challenge for us, because we have the same issues that all libraries have, in that, new technology comes along all the time and we have to pay for it somehow. But we have the added challenge of dealing with the smallest and the biggest. So one of the 3 biggest universities in Canada is a member. One of our smallest members has 70 students, and it only has 1 half-time librarian. So we have to figure out how to find technological solutions that work for the very large and the very small and everybody in between. Our funding is affected by demographics, so population changes obviously affect our membership fees, but funding for post-secondary education, so how much money the universities have to spend, is a significant challenge for us. And so part of our work is reminding people and being able to establish that what they pay us in membership fees is less than the benefit they get from belonging to a consortium. So they really look at the numbers. So we're constantly calculating the financial benefit for members in belonging to a consortium. There are many other benefits from working together in collaboration, but those are very difficult to evaluate and to assign value for. So when we're talking to university administrations, we tend to talk about the dollar value of the savings. Government here is changing constantly and rapidly, and so does legislation. And this has become much more challenging through the pandemic as rules changed all the time. So that affects us. Things like copyright legislation affect how we do sharing. Things like trade legislation affect where we buy things and how we have to pay for them. Because we're in Canada, regulations around currency exchanges are a big thing for us, because virtually everything that we negotiate for either comes from the United States or from Europe. So we're constantly dealing with currency exchange. And as is with libraries, capacity. So we don't have many staff. We always have more things we could be doing for our members and that our members would really like us to do. But we have limited a number of staff. And to get more staff, we would need more money, which means we have to think of a way to get that. So that's part of just growing and changing. And those are the kinds of things that we work on constantly. So where do I think we're going to go in the future? What we're working on right now is a model of brokering services among members. And so we're looking at, for example, if we have a member that is particularly good in one area and has in providing staff training, rather than everybody else developing training in that area, we're working on a way to bring the training from one of our members and making it available to everybody else. So, for example, one of our members is a very good staff training in helping people use legal information when they're not lawyers. not going to be lawyers. So community legal education. So we're hoping to work with them, we're working with them to hope that they can roll that out and make that available to the other members. And then how do we make sure that they get some kind of reimbursed or some kind of recompense for their contribution? Members are always looking for additional services, so we encourage our members to come forward and talk about it. We, in the past, purchased security strips in bulk for people. So when people had security systems in the libraries, that became something that people didn't need anymore. But we're constantly looking for what are things that if we worked together, we would have a much better deal for our members than if they work alone. So anything that they come and ask us for. I think the future is going to include selling more services to non-members because we can make some money doing that. And so negotiating licenses for non-members, finding other research or information services for non-members. And so I was just recently approached by a private library to see if we could help them negotiate for some material in another language, and we're going to see what we can do for them. And then finally, developing communities of interest and sustaining them. So when you have a really widely distributed population and you have such a diversity, it's sometimes hard for people to find other people who are interested in what they're interested in. So we've just started developing a community of interest to do with digitizing newspapers, because virtually every library in Alberta has a collection, a historical collection of local newspapers, which have two problems. One is the preservation is very difficult because they're old and falling apart, but the other is they're not accessible for people in other communities, and they're too fragile to be shared. So we are working with some member libraries to see if we bring those people together and we can then support some expertise for them, whether a community of interest would develop that would benefit everybody. So I've provided my contact information. I'm very happy to answer questions now, but also as you start thinking about the development of a consortium, please, I'm happy to provide you with documents or anything based on our experience. What makes this part of Canada unique because of our population distribution is we have a number of consortia that do different things. And we all work, so the consortiums then all work together as well, which puts us kind of in an interesting position. So I'm going to stop now and take questions, and then once I've answered the questions, if there's more time, I'll talk a little bit more about some of our experiences.
That we can implement a consortium similar to the Alberta Library here, especially with the law libraries in Brazil. And we have received some comments praising your presentation. I think that the question will come after the translation it's going. So I can email you the questions.
Absolutely. So Milena, if I could just then wrap it up by saying, when we started developing this consortium, it looked like the technology was going to be the big challenge. It turned out that that wasn't right. The big challenge is actually getting people to agree. And not just the libraries themselves, but getting the institutions to agree. So for example, for every university library that joined, we had to go out and do presentations and negotiate with the senior administration of that institution, because they were fearful that they could see their money that they had invested in their library being used by people from other places. And we spent, because I was part of that committee, actually, I've been with this organization for a long time, on and on. We spent 2 years traveling around, meeting with university administration, being able to show them the cost benefits, being able to bring information about borrowing and lending, to make them comfortable before they would sign the agreements. And so to just be prepared for that in the end, it turned out it isn't really the money and it isn't the technology. It's the politics. And I would suspect that would be the same in any country, that particularly when you're dealing with, deans who see that collection as part of what their school has to offer. University administrations see their library collection as part of their competitive advantage, and they don't want to lay that out and risk it.
Yeah.
And so that's where sometimes another consortium can help you with some data, or can help you with some kinds of agreements and some kinds of documents, so that when you're making those presentations, it becomes apparent that this is really well thought through, and that there's evidence that this actually works.
Yeah, so I think that you had a lot of hard work and big effort to achieve this goal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I hope that was helpful to your participants, and I'm happy to hear from people by email.
Okay, and now we have concluded our International Seminar of Law Libraries. Thank you so much, Dr. Margaret Law.
Thank you.
And obrigado a todos pela participação. E com isso encerramos nosso Seminário Internacional de Bibliotecas. Muito obrigado.